All right. Hello, all of you crazy people out there. Another live show tonight, obviously. I don't know, but we need to state what's going on here. But the title of this video sort of speaks for itself, but let's slow down and think about the tone of it. It's just a statement, it's not a battle cry. Okay. But one of the few things that have happened over the years in my collecting is Big Bang Theory. It's what made me aware of it, going all the way back to when I started collecting comics and reading comics as a young child in the late 70s, going into the 80s. It came quickly apparent to me that the comic books had a stigma that was attached to them. Never was a big deal to me. I've said it many times, and I always sort of looked at it as these you're missing out. But the stigma that comes along with it comes with a price sometimes, especially if you were a kid collecting back in my day and things. And I joke around and say that it was like my Vietnam, just and I kind of laugh at some of these memories and stuff. Okay, I've actually had two girls break up with me when they found out that I collected comics. Hey, what's up, John C? I've had people. A set of bullies, if you will, a leader with two worms on each side, meet me outside of a pharmacy when I jumped off the bus to go get my Wednesday comic books. And they were waiting for me outside. And they were like, "What do we have here? Comic books?" And they actually took them from me and ripped them in front of me. I actually had one of my stepdad's friends come to my apartment when I was a young man in my early 20s, and I kicked him out because he actually said, "What do you have there in your hand?" And in my own apartment, he ripped the book and laughed about it. I've had my biological dad and his wife and my half brother. I walked out of a comic book shop that was in a mall, and I had a stack of books about that thick, and before I could even, "Hey, what's up?" "Oh, everybody's popping in here. Awesome. Hey, guys." But I walked out before I could even say hello. He was sitting there shaking his head, going, "Waste of money," and things. So the stigma of comics have always been there. And despite things going mainstream and becoming popular, with the movies, almost as popular as wrestling in the late 90s and stuff during the Attitude Era and all that stuff like that, there's always still been a stigma. The movie and the comics, I think it's safe to say they are two separate things. Um, but none of this really bothered me. It was people missing out. But around 2007, the game changed. A year before the Iron Man movie and stuff, right? A little show came out called The Big Bang Theory. Big Bang Theory is about four physicists and a girl named Penny, who they've never revealed her last name, who have come out. And these guys are into geek culture. Okay. Comic book culture is what it was and stuff, right? And I probably around probably the sixth episode, I ended up catching the show and watched it off and on since then. I've had bouts where I went through the first 4 or 5 seasons and just binge watched the hell out of it and stuff, which is no big. Um, so never ever has the stigma of comics been anything that was on the back of my mind. Yet this show and many conversations I've had over the years, the show was on from 2007 and then from 12 years on there, and it's been in heavy rotation in reruns and stuff, showing up to 4 episodes at a time forever. Okay. So, but that's what has opened up a lot of conversation with people between the Marvel movies and this show. I had people ask me a few things. At first, it was like lighthearted talks, little questions I didn't read a lot into. What is with this camera? Just bear with us with this camera. But basically, what happened was I was asked, "Does this show offend you? Does the Big Bang Theory show offend you?" And I was like, "Why would it offend me? I love the show." And they were like, "Well, it exploits your culture." And I'm like, "My culture, the comic book culture." The words that were on their lips that they wanted to substitute for comic book was geek or nerd. Okay. I come from a time where those are very hurtful words. Those are words that disarm you, emasculate you, let you know that these people think they are above you or convince you you are beneath them. I've seen that, right? And as a man of my age, talking about this word may seem a little petty. That's going to be Howler Mouse's new thing, a little petty to talk about stuff. But it takes integrity away from the hobby. There's a lot of people who have embraced those terms, nerd and geek, and have attached it back to the comic books. And to me, it does the same thing to comic books in this collecting, in this hobby, that it does to a person. Okay. A lot of people use it ironically. A lot of people feel like it's an empowering thing. And if they want to use that and they have peace with it, I feel about it just like the stigma of comics. If it doesn't bother you, no big deal, but it is a topic, okay, to wake up to. Now, the thing about this with the Big Bang Theory, exposing people to people who read comic books and are into other things, I didn't realize, and it was over several years of this, every now and then somebody bringing up the show, talking about it, knowing that I was into comics, being with people on YouTube, doing some live shows and maybe talking about the show, that I finally realized something. It's not so much that people look at comic book collectors as the people in the Big Bang Theory. It's that they think it's real. These are characters. These are exaggerations. These are TV comedy characters that are not real, yet people assume this is what it's really like to collect comic books. And when it dawned on me, I talked to a muggle, if you will, when it finally came on there, as this was starting to dawn on me after like 5 years of this question popping up every now and then, just like the question of people who saw the first Avengers movie asking me, is this what it's like when you read comics? And I felt validated saying every month, but they think this is what it's really like to be a comic book collector. And that's fine. And that's fine. Like I said, this isn't a battle cry. This is a discussion, perspectives. Oh, man, we have a lot of people out here commenting. Great. I'll do comments a little bit later here. So the biggest thing that really bothers me is that and this is where it gets a little personal here, is that I grew up, for anybody that was throughout the 80s, whether you realized it or not, and there's people in this chat who I know were collecting comics and involved with it will know exactly what I'm talking about. We didn't realize that Watchmen was going to be that historic book. What is with the camera? We didn't realize that Dark Knight Returns was that historic book when it came out. These things caught on a little bit afterwards. There's people that were in the know and they were right on it. Then you had people who picked up on it several months, weeks, years after it came out. And then these things became legendary, right? These became the benchmark, the pinnacle of comics and stuff. And it brought a lot of integrity to the hobby. A lot of things that I was into when I was a kid, wrestling, okay, late 70s and 80s and stuff, we didn't care. You watched wrestling on the weekends. It was a ritual. You had it on at 9 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. Syndication, Memphis Wrestling, Mid-Atlantic, Georgia, NWA. WWE started coming down in the mid-80s thanks to Hulk Hogan, rock and wrestling and all this stuff. By the 90s, it was like, man, wrestling is just mainstream with the and it's true with thanks to the NWO and things like that. They had TV, they had movies made. These guys were popping up in cameos, like on that 70s show with Ken Shamrock and The Rock. These guys were everywhere, and now there's like all these little shows and stuff. They went mainstream, right? But wrestling still has that carny feel to it. You know what I mean? It's from its roots and stuff. And it was okay in the 80s to watch soap operas, but it was not. It was white trash, and you're an idiot for believing in this stuff. It's real to me. If you watched it, comic books were the same thing growing up, and they became chic. So what I was about to say is, after having this discussion about the Big Bang Theory, and it started to realize me that people were thinking, didn't realize these were caricatures of characters, if you will. They really thought this is what it was like. And I was told, oh man, it's okay. It's okay to like this stuff. Don't be offended with what I'm asking you. Geek Chic is in. When I heard Geek Chic, I was stunned. I was stunned. You could hear a pin drop for about 3 seconds. I was like, Geek Chic is in. And it was in the 2000s, at least, is what I was being told, that this was the new trendy thing and stuff, right? In the 80s, you had, in the 60s, thanks to the outsiders, like in the early 60s, there you had socias and greasers, then you had hippies. And in the 70s, you had your discotheques and your rock and rollers and stuff. In the 80s, you had your, what were they called, man? Preps and yuppies and whatever else was out there, and headbangers, and then grunge rockers and alternative. There's always been labels for the young in them finding themselves and what they're into. But I think it's really sad for someone to feel comfortable with this hobby that built up so much integrity through the works of Alan Moore, Frank Miller, J. Michael Straczynski, anybody who really put themselves out there. Mouse, there's books out there and stuff that brought a lot of credibility to it, to where comics were there. And then we got caught up in the muck that only comic book collectors can really talk about. It's like, did Watchmen kill the innocence of comics? There's whole conversations you cannot have with people outside of comics. You just can't do it. And that's one of the things that made this hobby fantastic. Now, the actual hobby of collecting comic books, I see no shame in it. The stigma is out there, but there's a stigma with a lot of things. I'm a social worker in real life. I've taken some like psychology classes and ways to make sure that your life is balanced so you can help other people and find what's missing. And there's all kinds of things out there, little graphs I can draw, little charts and little things showing what's in your life or the stressors and stuff. But I'm going to talk about the real world, not the caricatures here of the Big Bang Theory of what a lot of people view comic book collectors are. And I'm painting with broad strokes. I'm not talking about the general populace. You know what I mean? I'm talking that there are people out there that think this. But one of the signs of being a well-rounded person is that you do have hobbies and interest. Okay. Think about when, I'm from a different generation, but there's people out there who are probably can remembering stuff like you reach, there's certain eras of your life where you start out and family is everything. And then you get a little bit older and it's the gang, your friends out there that are older, right? And then you get a little bit older and you get out there and you sort of try to find yourself a little bit, and you experiment, party, whatever and stuff, right? Then you reach that stage where it's like the show Friends, your friends, now that you guys are in your early 20s or whatnot, that's your family for now. You know what I mean? That's your family. Your parents are dealing with empty nest syndrome, or they're picking up their life that they had before you were there. Sorry to tell you, they miss you. They love you. They went through it, but now that time is theirs. Your old bedroom is being turned into that study, that guest bedroom, that craft room, things like that. So you have this hobby, right? And you're not hanging out at bars. You're not lost. You're not wasting money on stupid things. You're not gambling. You're not doing all these things that would be fine in moderation. But you have a hobby where you read and you appreciate art and sequential art. What's great about comics is that the stigma makes it sort of cool. It was sort of a lowbrow artistic expression and actual art form to come out of the 20th century. Officially, 1933, the first recognized comic book, as far as I know, was called The Famous Funnies. And then it was like sort of, this is for kids. And then it got that 1950s, this is making juvenile delinquents. All of a sudden, it's a little bit forbidden. A little bit. Listen to that. Talk about downplaying an era. And then by the 60s, with Stan Lee, which I want to give him credit, had his hand on the pulse of a whole generation, became actual true counterculture. You know what I mean? Those EC comics of the 50s, going into the 60s, and all of a sudden, you have the Hulk. They got around the Comics Code Authority, right? You cannot show the United States government or the army or the military as bad guys, yet they were chasing the Hulk down. They had gotten around things, and people who were intellectuals and were reading Lord of the Rings and pulp novels, and the readers, the people who play chess and backgammon and stuff, right? It really is a very intellectual thing. One of the greatest things I also heard, and I think it was like Peter David or something, a man who's made a living out of writing Star Trek novels, his own novels. I have a Howling Mad over here, a little novel, comedic novel he made and things like that back in the day. They always tell you, get out there and read more than just comic books, which is absolutely right. Roy Thomas pulled so much so much from pulp novels and actual novels. A lot of people don't realize he wrote a Hulk story that was Moby Dick, and he gave it a sci-fi twist. Conan, where do you think Conan came from? You know, things like that. And I do believe Roy Thomas was a teacher or did something with literature before he got into comics. So let me catch a breath, get a drink, and see who is out here because I'm not done talking. All right. Hang in there with me. We want a few people to catch up here. John C. Grotto, Mind the Comics. What's up, brother? Dave Mckenzie. Oh, good to see you, man. Like I said, John C. is there. I used to be called a geek and a nerd when I was young because I collected comic books. Sleepy Reader jumped in. I'm intrigued to find out the meaning of the video's title. Just a topic, man. Just a topic with one man's opinion who, just because there's a YouTube channel, does not mean he's going to change the world or think he knows better. This has a perspective. Dave Mckenzie, I remember the stigma. It was pretty cool to like comics past 10 years old, as I remember. There you go. Well, that's too bad, man. I never had any negative reaction to connected to comics. See, I did, far and few between, but I was paying attention. That's just, I hate to say it, but that's part of my personality, to see how things connect, see a big picture, take things in, be a people watcher. Yeah. Dave Mckenzie, that was the 80s for me. Grotto, I like this take on it. We are museum curators that preserve the ephemeral, I got to get my glasses, popular culture of the world. The changes in vocabulary is one of the more uncomfortable aspects of getting older for me. Right. I'm a Simply Incredible podcast. What's up, brother? I'm a comic collector. I am a nerd. I am a geek. Now, this right here. This is why I'm saying this is not a battle cry. This is just a guy putting out an idea here. He has embraced it. He knows what the meaning of. This is not some young kid. This is not somebody following a trend. Simply Incredible podcast has some years on us. He's seasoned like many of us out here and stuff, right? He could do a video why he is a nerd and a geek, and I want to be as open-minded as he probably is listening to me. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at here. We need to be able to have conversations without everybody being, getting divided and stuff. Sleepy Reader. Okay, that's their conversation. It was weird in the late 90s, early 2000s when the trendy urban young women were dressing up to nerdy to be fashionable. If I could say that. All right, Gore Vidal. Good day, Tim. People who didn't read comics thought comic readers were just like the characters in Big Bang. That's exactly what I'm saying. And I feel like they feel like the characters are the reality. The show then inspired non-comic book readers to act the part of those characters. Absolutely. You're making a Xerox of a caricature, not a cartoon, Dave Mckenzie, I personally felt no negative stigma around my comic book enthusiasm since my mid-20s and now late 40s. Maybe it's because I got a little older and just owned it. And that's what I'm getting ready to actually talk about. All right, a lot of conversations going on. People call themselves nerds never got bullied in the 80s. Yeah, absolutely. So getting back on track here and a lot of people here and stuff like that. I personally feel like that there is a certain integrity if you are into the comic books with what you do. Now, some people are just collect the hobby. They don't think anything further than that, and that's fine. There are also other hobbies out there that you do. Comic book collecting is not my only hobby. Kayaking, hiking. If you have me on Instagram, Facebook and stuff, you see some of the things I do. There's been many things over the year. I'm currently filling up a sketchbook and stuff, right? I'm picking up on my drawing and stuff, which came from comics and stuff, right? But we know this. We collect comics. We're in the middle of it. And you've got to remember that as perceptions go, there are muggles out there that will never experience this unless they get into it. One of the greatest things that I can say about my brief years, I guess, if you put them all together, playing music and playing in different bands and going to concerts and things like that. And with comics, I have been to places I never would have been and met people because we had a common ground. The thing that I liked about the comic book collecting that I've seen, and the people that listen to heavy metal, it's something they have in common here, is they both have a stigma. heavy metal people can scare people that are, are not around the music and stuff. And then you have the people who collect comic books. There is this joy that we have that we share. These things bring joy for some reason to us, whatever it is. And I feel like that is the common ground. We'll take the WandaVision show that's going on right now, right? One of the books that West Coast Avengers by John Byrne took off, the first appearance of the White Vision. Now we'll take that right there. I read that when it came out. I still have it when it came out, 89, 90, whatever. But thanks to that show that came out a couple months ago, there are people who are reading those stories for the first time. And despite it being we'll say 31-year difference, just to be conservative, and I'm not going to, do the math off the top of my head, we're having the same experience. I've talked about one of the things that's great about comics is no matter what year that comic came out, and no matter what year you read it, when two people read it, even years apart, you're having this magical same experience. And then when you meet up, you can talk about the stories in the books and things like that, right? It's a great icebreaker. And if you don't think that's true, just look at the people in the chat, look at the people who have done comic book videos, and look at all the people who watch these things. It's real easy to forget that we have this magical device here called YouTube and cameras and stuff where everybody has found each other. Okay. Now, one of the other things about comics that I want to say that really bothers me when people use the word nerd and geek is that, believe it or not, as many comic books as many of you read out there, as many years as you've read comic books, go all the way back to the first time you ever picked up a comic book. So what do I have around here? We'll use an example, right? So I have to be this simple because you're not going to believe what I'm about to tell you, and maybe some of you ran across this, right? Here's the cover, title of the book. You open it up, and normally you would have a splash page, or you would have something catching you up from the previous issue or whatever, right? This isn't a really good one to get because there's a story behind this. And then all of a sudden you would have panels in a comic book of all the ones. Let me pick up Bone over here. So anyway, you open it up, and we all are familiar with comic book panels. We were all familiar how to follow a story. And every now and then some artists may get tricky and tell the story in a way where your eye has to gradually go. And there are comic book artists that you can look up. Kirby's specifically, when people were trying to figure out how to do great storytelling in books, where they would use the direction of the character's head, or they'd have something real subtle like a finger pointing, and it would like lead your eye across a page. One of the biggest things that I've heard over the years that people say that they tried to read comic books and they did not know how to read them. They could not follow the panels. Now, I want you to take just a second there. I don't want to lose you, but just take a second there that there really are people out there who have problems following comic book panels from left to right in America, and if it's manga, right to left and things. And a lot of manga that you open up now, my wife has a ton of them. I'm thinking about doing a video showing my wife's manga collection. Tells you how to read them. There's instructions. People feel intimidated. There are people who are intimidated by trying to read a comic book because the panels confuse them. Thus, they hate comics. They hate comics, and they add to the stigma, and they judge people that can do it because they can't. Now think about that. This is a real thing. So to be called a nerd and a geek, you have the basic skills to read a comic book. It's reaching a point to where you ought to give yourself a pat on the back, as unbelievable as that is, just for being able to hang in there and be able to read a comic book. Now, there's certain things in comic books that I don't like geek and nerd applied to. And it's because that this is a hobby. It's a fulfilling. Roll around to people who have hobbies, like I was saying. There's more to life than work. There's more to life than family. These are all important. I'm not putting any of them down. But you got to have a balance. You have things in life that are responsibility, things that are stressors, and there's times you take for yourself. And that's probably why a lot of people on here have said they never really experienced the stigma. We sort of came through that era where slowly, thanks to cartoons, TV shows, movies, and it being Big Bang Theory shows and stuff, and you have writers like Quentin Tarantino who stuck in a great big, there's some movie, Crimson Tide, where he helped with the script and he inserted this amazing. I remember being my mouth dropping in the 90s when I saw it, where he had two characters talking about the Silver Surfer. In Reservoir Dogs, he was describing, he had a character, Tim Roth, Mr. Blonde, describing the gangster, the head gangster, as looking like the Thing from the Fantastic Four. There was starting to be little references. And a lot of this stuff really started changing through the 90s. And this wasn't when it was Geek Chic. As much as it pains to say me now, after seeing his behavior over the last few days, Kevin Smith is in there, Quentin Tarantino is in there, Robert Rodriguez is in there. A lot of people who became great movie people read comic books, and they would play it in there. If you've seen a Kevin Smith movie, I don't need to go into all the Star Wars and comic book references. If you have seen Chase and Amy, it opens up at a comic book convention, and Mike Allred and some other people are in there. If you've seen Jay versus Silent Bob, you had Joe Quesada in there. There's been all sorts of things, and they've done comic books a time with the movies. But the movies of the 90s started out with conversations that we had in the 80s and early 90s. Maybe not as intense, maybe not as in depth, but it depends on your crowd and what you got into. I remember before I saw the movie Clerks, that we would sit around and get a notebook, and we would try to come up with every obscure quote from movies and comic books we read for fun, because we were sitting around the house bored and had rented everything at a local video store. And there was not crap on TV. So that was our people. And it's gone, and it's grown from there for over 30 years. And then all of a sudden it's taking a downslide. You know what I mean? It's taking a downslide. All of a sudden Geek Chic and Nerd came up. And I think that takes away the integrity of this hobby. I think it takes away the integrity of what you do. When you think about what we have here and how much the comic books have influenced things, it's really one of those things you can just wave that flag and tell people you have no idea how much Jack Kirby has influenced the world. I just recently learned George Lucas was co-owner of a comic book shop in the 70s. And to me, that finally sealed the gap on how so much of Star Wars came out of the New Gods. He was a Jack Kirby comic book collector fan. That's how he ended up making Howard the Duck in the 80s. The guy was a comic book dude. So even if comic books didn't directly influence a lot of pop culture in movies and the zeitgeist of our times and stuff like that, it's there, even if it's not obvious. That's nothing to be ashamed of. There are positive things that come out of this hobby when these books are done right, and you have variety and people doing what they love and putting a lot of passion in them. So if you have a passion for a hobby, be it comic books, stamps, art, kayaking, hiking, whatever's out there, leather crafts, pottery, whatever, it's no different. So why should one hobby out of all of these hobbies other people do we attach nerd and geek to? And there is a little bit of the old man in me. You know what I mean? The old man in me, where there's a lot of people that have embraced the term and they feel fine with it. And it's in the title of their YouTube handle and stuff like that. And it just really sort of bothers me, because I'm sort of like, what are you doing? I'm like, are you doing it ironically? Are you doing the things that really are none of my business? But when you're a YouTube comic book guy, and stuff like that, people tend to do the thing where they think we all know each other, at least in my experience. Okay, I've run across that. So when there is somebody over here making it all right to use the word geek and nerd and noob and stuff in there, even if they're doing it ironically or not, or they're just of a different generation, it still attaches to all of us, whether you know it or not. The potential is there. And that really just kind of turns a lot of people off from doing this. Oh, wow. Hello, Frost. This title is misleading. You're a nerd, not so much as a geek, but nerd, yes. Yeah, I hear you. See, he can do that because I know him. Oh, lightning. Learning how to read comics by Scott McCloud helps some of them. Absolutely. Jim Steranko wrote a book about the history of comics in 1970. The intro wasn't by a great American director, novelist, or musician. It was by Federico Fellini, who admired American comics and strips. Absolutely. Okay. I'm a movie and toy collector. People don't get that stuff either. It can all tie in. That's what I'm getting at. There's things you do, and it's positive. It's things you enjoy. I live a lot in my 20s. I lived a life where, like I talked at the beginning of the movie, for all that you missed it, I mentioned some times that I was more or less attacked or insulted to my face for having a stack of comics in my hand. And the one that I'm going to refer to now is the one where I said I walked out of a comic book shop that was in a mall. I ran into my biological father, his wife, and my half brother. And before I even said hello, he's looking at the stack of books going, that's a waste of money. Number one, I paid my bills. I had an apartment. I had a car. I had a job. I was in and out of college. Um, and I'm buying comics. I have responsibilities covered, and I'm still in those struggling 20s, and this was my joy, and it wasn't hurting anybody. A lot of people get stuck. Now, here's what's amazing. I'm one of the few people, and this is probably the most controversial thing I'll say, but I'm one of those people that thought and still think that high school is a wasteland. I feel like there's something better that could be done for people of that age that are in there and stuff that was there. And I had more time to do my interest than I had there doing in school. Me becoming a more rounded person, in that era and stuff had more to do with my interest, socializing, doing this comic book hobby. And there's things out there probably kept me out of trouble. It also led me to reading other things in books. Mark Twain, Letters from the Earth, is a big one that I talk about and stuff. It led me to reading other books. It made me re-explore Michael Moorcock. It made me read some of the Lord of the Rings. It made me read some books that I'm forgetting about, and they're right over here. I remember trying to read the biography of Jim Morrison, Nobody Here Gets Out Alive, and things like that. It led to other things. It also led to Dungeons and Dragons and stuff, right? The story that I'm going to tell that lets me know that there's more. This is not a nerd or a geek thing. It makes you more well-rounded. It helps you think. It helps you develop things. It's just storytelling, okay? Maybe it's replacing negative things if it's not a positive influence that I'm talking about here, right? But in high school, I got to play D&D twice a month on Fridays, and to be an all-night thing with a bunch of guys that were older than me, 17 to at least 30 or something. I started when I was 13 with these guys, played for 5 years with them. Then you compare that to the nights that I wasn't playing D&D, and I was just being a kid, going out to the skating rinks, hitting the road, drinking, partying, living, getting out of the house and doing things and just like blowing off steam is basically what it was, right? Fast forward to when I'm 20. I've moved away for 2 years. I've come back, and this is one of the big final decisions about why I joined the military. I went to a recruiter, dodged him, worked in a comic book shop, worked at Hardee's. Okay, you follow me? And then I ran into a guy I hadn't seen for 3 years from those days back at the skating rink and things, right? And he's like, hey, man, great to see you. Let's go riding around. And he picks up these two other guys. This is like around 93. This is right in the middle of Nirvana coming over on that swell, the alternative thing, the alternative grunge thing's coming up. The wave is coming up. It's at that big swell. And now it's getting ready to just kind of crash and take over everything and stuff, right? And there's these two guys that he knew. Now, I knew this guy back in the 80s for a couple years. And when you talk about chasing girls, partying, doing all this stuff, talking about music, reading comics and stuff, we then end up about 2:00 in the morning on a literal crossroads on a back road around farmland, nothing around there. And I look down on the other side of the car, and 3 of them are sitting there in a circle singing Kurt Cobain's I Think I'm Dumb. I was like, I gotta get out of here. Okay. So these are the same people that, as I'm saying here, we're not well-rounded. Okay. You know what I'm saying? I think if you had more fulfillment in your life with a hobby that brings you joy, be it comics or anything else, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a nerdy thing. Okay. I think a lot of moderation. I think if there are weird people, and I'm saying this like clinically, there are some people that don't have a diagnosis. They don't have a personality disorder. There are people who are just what we would define as just weird and strange. They seem to have a lot of isolation and don't hang out with a lot of friends and stuff, and they really get caught up in a hobby. It used to be comic books, now it could be like video games and stuff. It all went hand in hand, and I'm getting off track. I'd really have to go down a bunny trail, but down the bunny hole there to rabbit hole to talk about that. All right. Oh, it's all right, Frost. It's all right. This is supposed to be a light talk, so I can handle that. Dr. Silverage, I'm past the age of even caring if folks consider me a nerd or a geek. Life's too short to give anyone that kind of power to make you feel bad about a hobby you love. Absolutely. And I feel like a lot of people are opening that door to have that happen to them, without even realizing it. Okay. I spent like 15 years learning math administration. I still know how to divide. Yeah. So, yeah. Undisputed Frost again. Sad part is the nerds really are the ones who really make the world go round because they have the open mindset for creativity. The people who don't play games read books and comic books. Now, Frost, I'm assuming you're being here. Okay, never mind. You have nerds in quotation. And that's what I was getting ready to say. Why is it we want to attach nerd to things like this? I don't think it's right. And I don't think it's right to embrace it and stuff, right? In the scope of things in the world, this really isn't that big a deal, but there are tons of us who do this. Tons of us. Tons of us have done this for years. Tons of us have done this for weeks. It doesn't matter. There shouldn't be a real stigma on this. I mean, I can pan this camera around and you can see, what is it, 43 years of accumulation, you know, you know, Most of us has comics as a hobby since childhood, which is common as far as hobbies go. They grow old, but won't stop learning being kid. Things are frowned upon. And I tell you what, the ironic thing is for a hobby that causes people to be called nerds and geeks and things like that. It's a little bit of there was an era where it was a little bit of an outlaw hobby, a little bit. If anything, it sort of made the opposite of it. Ideas can be dangerous, and being exposed to reading through comic books and reading some of this thing, I put it up there with like punk rock lyrics that empowered a lot of people to be allowed to fight back. Muttman. Man, I'm pretty sure I haven't seen you in a while, brother. I'm pretty sure. Okay, anyway, I grew up in a small town. It was very difficult to be open about collecting comics. Then in college, it started to be okay, but I still feel weird talking about my home folks. Yeah, absolutely. Totally get that. And that's what I'm talking about. There are people who are just not into the hobby because comics do not interest them. I don't want to make it sound like we are some kind of elite bunch. In my mind, we are a very lucky bunch to have been able to find this hobby. And when you look at it, what is in a comic book? Okay, no matter what you look at, what is it? Something how many people can really make comics? Let me see if I can get a linear train of thought going here. Right? Not only are comic book collectors out there, but look at the people who make comic books or who have made comic books out of the year. You go all the way back to the beginning of the comic books. These were poor kids that pulled themselves up and made themselves a job. Not only did they make themselves a job, they lay the foundation of how to do good comics, figure out the rules, come up with the psychology and the skill. And a lot of people stuck around forever. Will Eisner, Jack Kirby, Al Williamson, any of those EC guys, on and on and on. Stan Lee, let's give credit where credit's due. And a lot of these guys were veterans that came up from the poor. And these people who were on the poor, if they were on another coast, they'd been making the movies back in the 40s and 50s, but they were on the East Coast. So you have a lot of creative people, a lot of brilliant minds. And the thing about it is that a lot of people who ended up making the comics, even though their sights were set on getting a comic strip in the newspaper on Sundays, that was the big money. That was the big time. And even though a lot of these people throughout the 40s and 50s and 60s had to lie about what their job is, these people influenced culture in ways that are unbelievable. And how many people, if you take the population of, let's say, America, and then you put in the number of people who have worked in comic books and stuff, I'm not a mathematician, and I'm not going to sit here and look up what the entire population is, but we're talking about big odds, like 1 in 10,000, 1 in 50,000. I feel I'm one of those people that feels very lucky to grow up in a time where I can enjoy Charles Schultz, David Bowie, Iggy Pop, even Guns N' Roses, seeing Metallica, getting to go to concerts and things, and have comic books in my life that enriches what I've done, the experience of just having the joy of living. You go to work, you earn your money, you make your responsibility, you pay your bills, you take care of whatever you have to take care of, and then you have that time for you. You reward yourself with it. And we do this stuff for so long, And we do this stuff so frequently. It feels natural. It's almost like just how often do you turn on a television? How often do you get off and watch a YouTube channel? We kind of forget how lucky we are to be in an era in history of where we're at. You know what I mean? And we got here. I remember thinking that big budget book movies would legitimize the hobby. Now I wish we would de-Hollywood the hobby again. That's a whole other topic. And one of the big things that has been going on, or there was people ahead of the curve. Now here's what's wild. And I feel like these days really are. If there's one thing I feel like the days are really behind us and they may pop up again, you have to understand, I can bring up this magazine called Toy Fair. And Toy Fair came out of Wizard Magazine. When you got Wizard Magazine back in the day, it was comic books, cards, toys, maybe some movies. And all of a sudden they did an offshoot. The cards, playing, Magic the Gathering got its own magazine. The collectible toys and action figures got its own magazine. Then they had this skit in the books, a strip, where it was Toy Fair, where they would take Mego toys and they would make comic book panels, take pictures of them, and have all these superhero toys talking to each other and stuff. Then they collected them. And I read one where all the comic book heroes, Thor and all of them, were at a comic book convention, toys, collectors, and everything like that. And they made fun of the guy who was bragging that he finished his Commandy collection. There was a time where even people who were buying eclectic comics all the way up to the 90s and were around a bunch of collectors, it really blew my mind that within the hobby, there were levels of people who were like, oh, that guy's really into comics. And that was also something. So it's always been a little bit a part of human nature to sort of have this classism. Is that a good word to put in it and stuff? Which cracked me up. Everything was X-Men. Everything was Batman. And then all of a sudden, if you were into eclectic books like Devil Dinosaur and Commandy and stuff, you were one of those guys, or a Marvel Zombie or something. Now, as far as the movies coming and legitimize them, I sort of, after the Batman thing, I thought it was going to repeat. I knew it wasn't going to legitimize comics, if you will, even though I think it has played a hand in helping that. That's subjective, But I thought comic book sales would go up because Batman stuff went nuts when the Batman Tim Burton movie came out in 89, flying off the shelves. It really was. Then you had Superman die. I figured it would help comic book sales also, but that's a whole other conversation about the quality of comic books in the last 10 years and stuff. And we've reached a time where there are comic book collectors who have grown up with comics just in the past 10 years, past 5 years, maybe the past 15 years. This is all they've known. Okay. You know what I mean? That's one of the things you have to remember as we get older. What we got here? Haller, I've been wondering, are you a fan of the precursor to comic books and pulp novels? Absolutely. Charlton 66 provided me with some Doc Savage. Just to answer this question real quick, the way I got started is that in my house when I was 4 years old, think of that 70s show, that basement, okay, but turn it into a trailer. And that's how young my stepdad and my mother was. They were very young. So I was in that 70s show is the best way to put it. Just put a little blonde-haired kid with no front four teeth in there, right? And in that house were Conan novels, pulp novels, books, magazine, monster books, and tons of comic books from the 60s and 70s that were coming out and stuff, right? That's what I started on simply because they were laying around the house everywhere. That's what got me started. And I still have some of those books, okay? And things like that. So yeah, a lot of, even though I focus mostly on comic books and stuff, all of that stuff influenced me. There were Kiss posters all over the bedrooms. There was actually a spinner rack in my house in 1979 because I got in the car with stepdad because he was babysitting me and he wanted to get his butt to this place called Magic Mart. And when we got there, I was devastated. Couldn't figure out what was going on because we didn't go in the store so I could go down the toy aisle. I'm a little kid. Instead, we go in the back where the trash is and he takes a spinner rack that they had thrown out. So in his bedroom, he had his vinyl record collection, one of those old 70s stereos with the big speakers that was very serious with an 8-track in it. And then we had Kiss posters everywhere, and we had comic books on a spinner rack. One of my first X-Men comic books was X-Men #3, the first appearance of Blob. Does that make me a nerd? Does that make it a nerd? That made it tolerable in that house with that asshole. Okay, you know what I mean? That made it super tolerable. Comic books brought a lot of joy in my life. I see the positives of what comic books can do for people. I see the positives of having a hobby that enriches your life. I see a hobby that opens your mind and makes you a more well-rounded person to deal with the stress in life, just like any other hobby. And with anything, is it perfect? It's not perfect. Does it have the same effect on people? No. Does it have people who are just not into comic books? It doesn't have what it needs to grab them. That's perfectly fine, because you could probably sit here, think of your friends and family and stuff, and be like, why are they into that? It's kind of weird. It just doesn't, you will blow it off without even having a second thought. That's why it's good to kind of slow down a little bit and think of things and try to get a perspective on it. Yeah. And like I said, we were poor as dirt growing up. You know what I mean? And this lowbrow medium, you know what I mean? This lowbrow art form, and it is an art form, in my opinion. That's not trying to elevate it or make it something it's not, was there. And man, you talk about being a kid and have that around there. I do not take it for granted. I do not take it for granted. I wish a lot of people, I wish a lot of people had experienced that and stuff, right? What we got here? Movies like Clerks and Mallrats are a big culture point for collectors. Made me feel like subculture was actually a cool thing. Yeah, I mentioned that earlier there. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I've caught up here. Yeah. Okay, comics are really for poor people, but nowadays they cost $6 to $7. Now, here's the thing, okay? I didn't really think about this till I just read that and stuff, but with all the speculation going on, and if you go on eBay and look at eBay prices, and with a lot of the stuff that are havens of the past, are comic book shops, and this is one where I'm not going to paint in a broad stroke here, because I don't know if every comic book shop has done it, but I've run across them, and I've seen people online talk about it. And I made a video 2 months before it hit Instagram, and some videos came out. But it's the fact of people letting you go through their comic book dollar boxes, back issues, and then they come up there and then they look them up on eBay. And what you thought was in a dollar box, they were like, no, we got to see what it's for. You wasted the time. You've been free labor. I've already done the video and stuff like that, right? So for something that has the stigma and something that people want to tie the words nerd and geek to and stuff like that, there's some people who have a lot of money, paying big bucks for slab comics. And I've often wondered, is this going to be like Lobster? What do you mean like lobster? Lobster used to be considered a peasant food, probably in the late, 1800s. It was a peasant food. Then one day somebody put it in a restaurant and charged a lot of money of it. And now lobster is that, oh boy, I'm on a date and she's ordered the lobster, the most expensive meal, and it's a sure thing. All right. I'm beginning to wonder if that's where comics are sort of going, and that's shooting off the hip. Seeing these people who come in and have $800, $900, $1,600 to blow on a comic book blows my mind. Okay. You know what I mean? I'm like, who is really collecting the comic? Have the rich come in and they're going to be picking and choosing all these key books and everything like that? And is that who's going to have the books? Is it going to be a class thing now? I don't know. Okay. But anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say. I could go on and on, but we'd be spinning a record. I appreciate everybody that's popped in here. And yeah, there's a lot of chats going on and stuff. So if you're watching this, I hope you turn on the chat to read the great comments going on. I appreciate everybody that has popped in here. I appreciate everybody who came in here with an open mind and contributed and listened and thought about things. So make sure you subscribe, make sure you thumb up. Let's get this video moving around and stuff like that. And this is the sort of content I'm kind of pushing on. Topics that pop in my head and Maybe there's something there, maybe there's not. So hit that bell to let it know when I'm doing this, because I'm doing these videos when I have time. Okay. I work a lot. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. Later. Oh, wait. I got one question real quick. Last question, then I'll go. Just because he got it in there. Haller, what's the most amount of money that you ever spent on a comic book? $27. Gold Key, Johnny Quest. The only one they made back in 1964. Was it Gold Key or Dale? Look at that. Shooting from the hip. It's my Grail book. I paid $27 at a flea market for it. The thing is supposedly worth, I don't know, man, maybe, I'm not exaggerating, maybe $700 at one point at some time and stuff. $15, $27 down, $15. I built this channel on showing people how I started hustling for comics in 1990 when they went from 75 cents to $1, $1.25, $1.75, $1.95, and that was it. After that, it was a lot of secondhand stuff, back issue bins and stuff like that. All right, guys, later. Be excellent to each other.